This year, reform is on the mind of lawmakers. Dozens of measures and bills have been introduced with the goals of fighting corruption and increasing transparency and accountability in the state legislature. What measures have a chance of becoming law? And can the public trust elected officials to regulate themselves when it comes to the issue of corruption? Join the conversation next on Insights on PBS Hawaii.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Darrell Huff. Motivated by the very public examples of corruption by government officials in recent years, the Hawaii State House created the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct. Its job was to review and assess existing state laws, attitudes, and practices that led to corrupt behavior and offer solutions. In December 2022, the Commission presented findings and 31 specific proposals focused on transparency, accountability, and ethical behavior. In addition to the Commission proposals, more than 100 measures with the same goals are on lawmakers' desks this season. Tonight, we discuss the prospects for real change. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email us or call us with your questions. We also encourage you to get involved with the conversation on our Facebook page. Now to our guests. Dan Foley served as the chair of the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct. A longtime civil rights advocate and attorney, he retired as a judge from the Hawaii Intermediate Court of Appeals in 2016 and is currently a non-resident justice in the Palau Supreme Court. Senator Carl Rhodes has been a member of the Senate for the last 6 years, serving the people of Pu'unui, Nu'uanu, Pacific Heights, Liliha, Chinatown, and downtown. He is chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and prior to the Senate spent 10 years in the State House. Janet Mason is a member of the Legislative Committee for the League of Women Voters. She worked for more than 17 years as an insurance risk manager and consultant. She also served on the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct. And political analyst Colin Moore is also with us. He is an associate professor and the director of the Public Policy Center at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I want to throw the question out that I talked about in the introduction, and I'll start with you, Judge Foley. Do you feel in your examination of the corruption in Hawaii that it's a few bad apples, or do we have an actual culture in our government that needs to be addressed?
You know, that was testimony came to us from Randy Roth, former law professor, author of Broken Trust. And he testified before the commission that he believes there's a culture of corruption. Culture of corruption, as he defines it, isn't necessarily a bribery case or a fraud case, but so-called pay-to-play, where people look the other way. There's favoritism. It's not a level playing field, and it's just the way the boys do business. The public thinks it's widespread. The House asked my commission to look at the laws concerning campaign spending, ethics, and lobbying. Recognize there's a loss in public trust, address those laws, and try to restore public trust.
Let me go to Senator Rhodes. I mean, your colleague was one of the ones, Kalani English, who got ultimately convicted of taking bribes. What do you think of that question, bad apples versus culture?
Well, I mean, it's awfully hard to deny that we've been on a really bad streak, the state as a whole, not just the legislature. And, you know, you can go through the litany of people who have been caught in outright corruption, from the Liquor Commission to the legislature to the city councils, just, you know, on and on and on.
We only have an hour, though, so.
So I've never talked for an hour in my life, so that's not really a problem. But but I do think that it's not really fair for the public to just say they're all the same. They're not all the same. My experience, I've been in the legislature for quite a while now. The vast majority of people are trying to do the right thing, and they play inside the rules.
Janet, from League of Women Voters, what's your opinion about that question?
I would say that there have been a few bad apples for sure, as Carl mentioned, but to me, the culture is vulnerable or weak. And that's what the commission was trying to shore up, as well as very specific action changes.
You know, when you say the culture is weak in what ways do you mean?
Well, there's plenty of encouragement for secrecy. and for doing business out of the public eye. The legislature is not subject to the Sunshine Law, and that does affect the way that business is done there.
You know, Colin Moore, I'd like you to follow up with that question, but also, you know, when we talk about corruption in this community, the legislators that were convicted were 2 legislators out of 76. An awful lot of these other cases have been outside the legislature. They've been bureaucrats, they've been police chiefs and prosecutors. What do you think all this says about the culture that we have, and is it the bad apples? How does that fit together?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree with what Janet was saying. I mean, there's a culture of coziness that partly is just because we're a small state in the legislature. It's been dominated by one party really since statehood. So you don't have that opposition party, which often does a good job forcing issues into the open. A lot of legislators get elected very easily, so they don't have to fight very hard to win re-election. Very few incumbents lose. So I think that culture breeds a certain amount of complacency around corruption issues, and it can be, I think, easy to begin to bleed into some soft corruption. And I think that's where it starts in the administrative state, where there's a big problem. So I certainly agree with Senator Rhodes that a lot of legislators follow the rules. They're very ethical people. They work very hard for a job where they make relatively little money. But there are those temptations. And I think in some ways, the bigger problems are in the bureaucratic agencies. I mean, that's something maybe we can explore a little later in the show, where there has been a lot of just straight out bribery. I mean, the Kalani English case, for example, is unique, and it's unique nationally. I mean, I usually tell my students that kind of votes, I mean, dollars for votes, just handing someone cash to vote in a certain way is extremely unusual. But there are a lot of softer forms of corruption that I'm sure we're going to get into that relate to campaign finance and other kind of just influence peddling.
Let me get back to Judge Foley. In terms of this weakness of the culture, where does that come from? Where do you see that happening? Is it just because we're this island state where everybody kind of knows each other? I had a conversation recently with someone who was in government employment, and we talked about conflicts versus complementary relationships. There's so many relationships where people just know each other, and it's easy just to say, oh, that's a good connection you have, as opposed to a conflict.
Well, we had the Bishop Estate controversy that went on for years, and people pretty much knew about it, didn't do anything about it till the Broken Trust editorial came out. And then in the 80s, we had Fat Boy Okuda, corruption in the judiciary.
He was the head of the state sheriff within the judiciary.
Right. And the whistleblower, who was deputy sheriff, was fired. No lawyer would take his case. I took his case, sued the judiciary, and helped write the first Whistleblower Act. So there is, my experience has been, with the exception of a few people that stand up, and this was Professor Ross' theory, most people just want to go along and get along, not rock the boat, not stand out, and also afraid of retaliation if they report what they consider to be misconduct or abuse in office.
Do you sense, Senator Rhodes, that people are so afraid of retaliation in this state that they're afraid to come forward on things?
Yeah, I think they are, but I don't think it has to do with the legislature or the government so much. Where I see it is with neighborhood problems, where someone knows that their next door neighbor is firing off bottle rockets or something they're not supposed to. They don't want to say anything to anybody. I would go back though to the point about, we've been a one-party state since the 56, 54 revolution. I don't really think that's the issue, because, for one thing, if you look at who would most likely replace Democrats, it would be Republicans. And if there's a party that's embraced corruption in this country in my lifetime, it's the Trump Republicans. So I would say internally to the party, there are lots of different viewpoints, and everybody doesn't get along, because your enemy in Hawaii is never the Republican. The Republican is always irrelevant. It's other Democrats. So I think the checks and balances that you talk about, between parties, that are often between parties, just aren't relevant here. It's the checks and balances are internal.
Go ahead, Janet.
I don't think we should overlook financial insecurity either. Certainly it's hard on a $99,000 a year salary that the legislators are paid to support a family. I don't think that was the motivation in the bribery case completely, but with any kind of corruption, you need a motive and you need opportunity. The commission did try to deal with this directly by expanding the original charge, which was to look at lobbying, campaign financing, and ethics, and we also looked at fraud and voting in elections and transparency. So it's a package. It's not just one single thing that needs attention.
Right, and I did, go ahead, sorry.
We don't get paid $99,000.
I was going to say, how much is that?
72, I think.
Oh, sorry.
It was raised recently. I don't know exactly,
You
but
wish
it's
it
not.
was
It's
99.
definitely not 99.
But you just proposed that we have a full-time legislature. Talk about how you think that might.
Well, I think that if you did have a full-time legislature, you would probably have to pay people more. And well, the proposal I put forth was full-time legislature and no outside income. So I don't know what the percentage is right now, but quite a number of us have second jobs. And it was, the system was set up that way. It was supposed to be a citizens legislature. You're supposed to come into session for 4 months and then do another job. The thing that I think is the flaw in that is that there aren't that many other jobs where they are willing to part with you for 4 months. And some people manage to do it, but it's harder than it looks.
And sometimes the employers have an interest in the legislature. You might.
And that's always an issue, yes.
You know, I did get a question, you know, how many members on the panel are in favor of public financing of elections? And this is from Tom in Waikiki. And, you know, that brings up the whole campaign spending, campaign fundraising. How much work, let me just ask Colin, how much work needs to be done to change, do you think, our campaign financing system? Because when we talk about term limits, one of the things that happens if you don't have to worry about getting reelection because you're being reelected easily to the same seat all the time, is you can accumulate a tremendous amount of campaign money. So where do you think we do need to pay attention to our campaign finance system? And in response to Tom's question, you know, what about public financing of elections?
Sure. I actually have been working on this. There's a brief that I wrote for UHERO that should come out next week, and we really explore the different forms of public financing. And you know, Hawaii is mandated to have a partial form of public financing in the '78 Constitution. In fact, we were one of the very first states to start that. But unfortunately, our current system really doesn't work. There are very, very few candidates who accept any form of public financing, partially because, or in large part, because there's no way you could accept that money and come anywhere close to running a competitive campaign. I mean, to run a competitive campaign, you have to have money. And in Hawaii, it's quite a bit of money, maybe around $50,000 to run for House. Senator Rhodes has introduced a great bill that I fully support that would provide full public financing. So the idea is you would get a certain number of qualifying donations, and then the state would grant you the rest of the amount of money you need to run. This works very well in Maine and Arizona and Connecticut, but there are some other things you could consider too. New York City and actually New York State has what they call a supermatch program. So for example, you donate $10 to the campaign. New York City matches that times 8. So that would mean getting $90 for your campaign.
I mean, Senator Rhodes, what difference do you think that would make?
Well, I think that the campaign finance part of it is the most, what a geek I am, the most interesting part of it, because these other corruptions that we've seen are really cut and dried. There's no question that it's just, you're not supposed to do that. No matter what system you had, you're not supposed to do that. With campaign financing, it gets blurry because to win a race anywhere, you have to have two things. You have to have the obvious thing. You have to have more votes than your opponent. But how do you get those votes? You know, when I first ran for the House in '06, I ran in a district. I live in a high-rise myself, and probably 60% of the population was in high-rises. Well, you can't talk to those people unless you can mail to them. That's really the only way you can get to them. And you have to have money to do that. So when you're looking at a campaign, you have to look at two things. You have to look at how are the voters responding to me, and can I keep enough donors on my side to move forward with stuff. With the public financing, you know, once you've reached the trigger points, you have to get small donations from quite a number of people in your district, is the proposal that we have right now. Then you get enough money that you're going to be competitive in a race. And then you don't have to look over your shoulder at donors. The donors that you're looking over your shoulder at are taxpayers. And that's why it's advantageous.
Yeah, Judge Foley, in your work with the commission, where did you folks come down on the campaign finance?
We recommended expanding it. We did not propose a bill for full public financing, as Senator Rhodes is, but we support that. The only reason why we didn't propose a bill like his, we didn't know if the legislature was willing to go for it with the money, and so we took a more modest expand public financing with the note if the legislature is more bold. And I did submit testimony in support of his bill on behalf of the commission. So I think I would agree with Professor Moore. I think that's a big step forward if his bill can.
Janet, what's your thought about public finance?
Oh, the League supports full public financing. We have for a long time. And this would be a game changer in terms of the atmosphere around the politics in Hawaii. And, you know, when you think about it, people are paying indirectly for campaigns. So, you know.
So describe why you say that.
Well, the cost of supporting the candidates is sort of built into their lifestyle and what they spend the money on in the campaigns. And I just think it's time to bring it into the open.
So it sounds like, I want to understand this because it is a big proposal. Suppose you do public financing, which means that the taxpayers are essentially going to be paying for the campaigns of the candidates, would probably bring a lot more candidates in because they're more likely to be able to run a campaign versus an incumbent who's got a big pile of money. But also sounds like what you're saying is that because they're so beholden to these campaign donors, the taxpayers are already spending more money than they might because they're spending money on these companies.
Well, it's an impression. I don't have empirical evidence about it, but it would be some relief for everybody, certainly relief for the candidates who wouldn't have to spend their time fundraising.
So the other big thing that came out of the commission, and it was one of the more controversial divided votes that you had, was on term limits. And I thought David Shapiro in his column this weekend actually described that in advocating for it very well, as every once in a while you just got to flush the system out. And he also pointed out the fact that if you just keep running for election, you can build up all this money and then nobody feels like they can go against you. Talk about why term limits was proposed and why there was some pushback on it.
It was the most divisive proposal that the commission put forward. The commission just barely put it forward by 4-3. And we proposed a 16-year term limit, which also made people that support term limits upset. It's too long, 16 years, which we felt was somewhat of a compromise. We did see the legislature as different than the county councils, the governor, and the mayor offices, where power's more concentrated. The county councils, unicameral, smaller members. We said with the legislature, 70-something members, 2 houses. You could do 8 years in each house. You know, testimony was given to us on the large turnover we've had in membership in both houses in the last 10 years, that it should be up to the voters, it shouldn't be arbitrary. But one of the reasons why we put it forward is one of our mandates is to help restore public trust. And the public really wants this. They really want the opportunity to vote on it. And so we did propose it, but it looks like it's not moving in the House. I don't think there's been a hearing yet in the Senate, so I'm not real optimistic right now.
Senator, what do you think?
I've always been opposed to term limits for the legislature. I'm opposed to them for city councils too. For the executive branch, I think it makes sense because you're like trying to drink from a fire hydrant for 8 years and you just can't do it physically after a while. You just burn out. The reason I'm opposed to it is because it transfers all the power from the legislative branch to the executive branch. You know, the first 3 or 4 years that you're in the legislature, like most any complicated jobs, you don't really know what you're doing. And by the time you do know what you're doing, especially for the shorter term proposals, and yours wasn't a particularly short one, I understand that, you know, you're just getting in stride. But you're across the table almost always with career civil servants. I almost used the word bureaucrat. It's not pejorative. You have to have bureaucrats to run a modern society. But they just know more than you do. They've been around forever. There's no term limits on them. They recycle through different administrations, and we just be overwhelmed, outgunned, and I don't. And then the other point is on the money side of it. The studies indicate, I think, that money is most important in your first race, because that's where nobody knows who you are. Once you've been there a while, the money becomes less and less important, and you can get to the point where you can tell your donors, some of them, hey, you know what, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway.
Didn't you just make an argument against your own public financing bill?
No, not at all. Not at all, because it's that first race that's really important. And if you could publicly finance the first race, then yes, it's easier after that, but you could still use the same process.
And I guess also opponents running against you would have enough money to actually run against you. And
yes.
Get that name
Well,
yeah.
We started that. We almost went down that thread a couple minutes ago. I'm not so sure it's going to be that easy under the proposals that we have to get started. I mean, we're talking about for a House race, you need 100. I think we changed it to 125 $5 donations. Well, think about that. If you've never run for office, you go out into a neighborhood where you might know a few people, but you need 125 $5 donations. I don't know. I think if I were starting over again, that would definitely be the way I would go, because I would think that would be my better shot. But that is not a foregone conclusion for a new House member.
Let me let Colin Moore on term limits. What do you think the effect would be?
I mean, I oppose term limits. I respect what Judge Foley said. I think, I understand why the commission would have proposed those, because I think you do hear a lot of support for term limits in the community. But we're not operating blind here. A lot of states do have term limits. There's been a lot of studies on those states with term limits. There's no evidence that those states produce better public policy, that they have lower levels of corruption. What I do think there's evidence is the legislature becomes somewhat less professionalized because you have more amateur legislators. Some people think that's a good thing. They want a citizen legislature with more turnover. That is a goal that does seem to be accomplished to some degree by term limits, but it doesn't create better public policy. There's no evidence for that. And as we always say in political science, power abhors a vacuum. Something else is going to fill that. As legislators become less professionalized, someone else is going to step in. And so who benefits? The executive branch benefits. As Senator Rhodes said, civil servants benefit.
And the lobbyists.
And that's what I was going to say. The lobbyists benefit because most lobbyists, good lobbyists, are incredibly knowledgeable people. And most legislators, rely on them to understand bills, to understand, the lay of the land, who's supporting
Absolutely.
which. And so in any case, I think the end story here is that it doesn't produce better public policy, and we haven't had any studies that demonstrate that.
I'm going to give Janet a chance to get the last word in on term limits.
Well, the League opposed term limits, and it's a very popular idea, but there's no evidence that term limits prevents corruption for a start.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you because I'm looking at the clock, and I want to move quickly now because I'm starting to get questions in. I want to honor our folks who are calling in. We are focused on the legislature a lot so far in this show, and I think that an awful lot of the corruption scandals are outside the legislature, and I want to get to that. But we did get a question from Dan via email. It seems that bills are being killed rather than any conflict of interest issue being fixed. This issue of bills being killed, I think one of your proposals dealt exactly with the power of committee chairs in our legislature. Can you describe what that power is and why it might lead to some sort of level of corruption?
Committees operate differently. They're not all the same. Different chairs run their commissions differently within a house, between houses. But some of the proposals, the complaints we got from the public is a committee chair deciding not to hear a bill, deferring a bill, and not even explaining why. So sort of one step is, if you're going to defer a bill, kill it, explain why, so at least the public. There was also a proposal that if bills aren't heard, to explain why. Well, that's kind of difficult when you see all the bills that are introduced and referred to committee. May not be practical, but it shows the public sentiment. There may not be a whole bunch of corruption in the legislature. My experience with the legislature, and I've been going there since '84, it's very positive. people I work with I respect. And I've always been treated fairly, whether they agree or disagree, and have never felt poorly treated. But not all the public thinks like I do. So I think the more transparent the legislature is in the way it operates, that the public can see why they're making decisions, why bills are being heard, why bills aren't being heard, why bills are being killed, that would help restore trust in the legislature.
Senator Rhodes, I find you having to be the defender of the legislature.
I figured that's why I was here. But
Yes, thank you for being here. So how do you handle that in your committee? Because it's a judiciary committee. You are very much a gatekeeper for what actually gets passed in the end. How do you handle that kind of an issue? I did see you this morning when I was watching your hearing actually say, I'm actually going to have a vote to hold a bill today. And it was interesting. You do make an effort to explain why you are deferring measures or so on, but how do you handle that as a committee chair? How do you make the decisions about what you're going to hold or not hold? How much consultation are you even able to have with your other members?
So for the bills that I actually decide to hear, so for most committee chairs, there are a few of the smaller committees where you actually could hear every single bill. Most of them you can't. You don't have enough time. I certainly don't have enough time. So once I've decided to hear a bill, I try to be very open about what it is. So even from things like describing the bill at the beginning of the session, I don't just say SB 123. I say SB 123, which does X, and spell it out. That was not common practice 16 years ago when I started. If I decide to, so deferral is purely a prerogative that's within the chair's power, and the hold is actually the old style of doing it. Used to have hold votes on everything. If you weren't going to move a bill forward, the committee chair would say, let's hold. But taking the responsibility on yourself is a way to, frankly, to protect your members. Then they can claim that, well, I would have supported it, but the chair deferred it, so I couldn't do anything. If there's a hold vote, then you're on the record. So I can see why people would want that. It does take longer. It takes another 2 minutes for every bill that you stop. When I defer something, I explain why I defer it. I say, the House bill's moving, they've already crossed it, there's no point in us doing 2 of them, so we're just going to wait for the House, or this bill just isn't ready for prime time yet, we don't have time to fix it, so we're going to defer it, maybe we'll look at it this summer. I give an explanation, and I think most chairs do. I think the part where it gets murky for outsiders is if I just don't hear the bill at all. I don't give an explanation because there's several hundred of them usually, and it's a time issue. I think it's fair to say that, there's 2 things that are fair to say. One is there's multiple different reasons for not hearing a bill, but bottom line is you can infer from a chair not hearing a bill that either it's not a priority or they're opposed to it.
Colin Moore, Chairman Rhodes made an interesting point about saying one of his roles as a chair, even though it might not be the role that he's signed up for, is to help protect members who could then blame the chair. I've always heard that one of the reasons people rise in leadership to the top is their ability to protect their members. What does that mean in terms of accountability? Is there accountability for decisions that are, might not be in the best interest of the public?
Well, I think there's still accountability. The chairmen are there, or the chairs of the committees are there because they're, like you said, their members want them to be there, and usually it's because they're fair. They're good at protecting their members. I don't think that's always so transparent to the public, but it is one of the things that makes the legislature work. I think in all of these reforms, we have to be careful that we don't bog the legislature down so much with procedure and transparency, which of course I believe are important, that they can't actually get what they need to do get done, which is to deliver better public policy for people. And that means sometimes people can't speak on the record. Sometimes, they have to be able to, they need a little bit of cover. All of these things make the institution operate effectively. It's one of the reasons, which I thought was a really important point that the commission made, which was not to ask the legislature to operate under full sunshine laws. It would be hard for me to imagine how that could work, how you could produce good public policy if you couldn't have the sort of frank discussions that are necessary. So, it's a balance, and I don't think we should move so far in the direction of reform that it's all about procedure and not about results. Because at the end of the day, that's really what the public cares about, that public policy matches what they want. They want to see their communities improving.
Let me go back to Judge Foley. What of all the things you proposed, if you could only have one choice of something that the legislature would have to change, I'll give you two choices. What would it be that you think would help, at least with the public perception?
All 31 proposals. And
An absolutist position.
Janet talked about the package, and it is a package because every proposal enhances another proposal. You take 3, for example, on false claims, false statements, and fraud. All the prosecutions now against state and county officials and employees are done by the United States Attorney, not our Attorney General, not our county. The Attorney General, all 4 county prosecutors, the FBI, all testified before our committee saying we need federal statutes, we need state statutes like the federal statutes. So we proposed those. So just those 3 would help investigation and prosecution. Our state and county law enforcement could do what the federal did. That's one area.
But let me understand though. So you're saying that part of the weakness in our system is that our laws aren't clear enough to be able to prosecute?
Not clear enough, not as comprehensive, and not as strong. The bills, the federal bills have mandatory sentencing. The bills we're proposing, and it was controversial, would have a mandatory minimum of 1 year. You wouldn't get a slap on the wrist. You wouldn't get probation. But all the state and county law enforcement that testified said with those 3 statutes, it would help us investigate, uncover, and prosecute corruption.
I'm having a deja vu moment because we covered the Mayor Harris campaign finance schemes. And there were multiple people who were charged with making either false name contributions or bundling contributions, being bag men or bag ladies for politicians. And they were convicted and they pleaded guilty and they all got probation. Most of them were able to wash the convictions off of their records. And I don't think it was because of the judges. I think that there was an active sense that this is white collar crime. It's not a big deal. Senator Rhodes, I think you actually did pass. You had one of those bills today, the fraud bill.
Yeah, I would be very surprised if we get to the end of this session without having that bill or something like it pass. Yeah, there's more than one on the move.
And how would it change the way that law enforcement can act on a case?
Well, it changes the way that the state and county prosecutors can act. It doesn't really change what the feds could do. It just mimics the federal honest services fraud is the main one, I think.
And that's one of the 3 bills we recommended, and I supported that bill.
Janet?
Well, in particular, the campaign financing comes to mind. There's a specific provision in one of the fraud bills that makes it a fraud to file a false statement or a false filing. To me, that would greatly enhance the ability of the Campaign Spending Commission to prosecute fraud on the campaign spending side.
Let me, we've got a couple questions right on this point, and I want to read them. One says, corruption cannot be fixed by the local people. It would take federal oversight to fix it. Longer question from John via Facebook. Seems that only the federal government can be objective enough to build cases. State public procurement is rife with corruption. State procurement process is a cesspool of corruption. This is quite an elaborate question. Concentration of money often equals or at least influences power. We all know this, and yet nothing gets done unless the feds do it. Judge Foley, you brought this up specifically. Is it the feds' access to these better laws or more straightforward laws, or is it actually the need for people to come from out of town to do this?
There may be a case where an out-of-towner is better, but I can tell you, I know these county prosecutors, I know the Attorney General, they want these tools. They're asking for these tools. One of the bills that Senator Rhodes just talked about, the fraud, that was from the law enforcement package, state and county. They want to do it. They want to have the tools to do it. Also, part of it is sending a message to state and county officials and employees that if you engage in illegal practices, fraud, false statements, false claims. The resources will be there, not just the federal government, state and county resources to uncover that corruption, to prosecute, to convict, and you will go to prison. It will not be a slap on the wrist. Our hope is if those bills pass, the message is out there, it will act as a deterrent for people to think twice.
Let me call in more, given your experience with politicians and also from what you've seen of the way the bureaucracy operates, the procurement system and so on. And I know you're not an expert in procurement, but do you think that this threat would change the culture at the procurement level, at the contracting level, at the discretionary level, building permits, those sorts of things?
I mean, I think, like Judge Foley said, I mean, all of these bills are sort of part of this ecosystem of reform. So, yes, increasing penalties, I think, would be effective. I know one of the penalties was a decade away from public office, which would be very damaging to any ambitious politician. I think the problems with procurement, the sort of pay-to-play that we've seen for so long, that was at the root of a lot of corruption scandals. Something like public financing might really help to address that. I mean, donors are much less important if you're getting your money from taxpayers. Of course, we know that donors get a lot of access, and you might get special consideration in a contract. That might help solve the problem. I think at the bureaucratic level, there is a cultural problem in some cases. I know Civil Beat ran a story a few weeks ago about DPP, where there was someone working for DPP who also had a side business, a side electrical business, where he
that
was
somehow
just
shocking.
Right, checking, approving his own work. And that to me seems like more of a cultural thing. I mean, I think in a more functional bureaucracy, someone would get wind of that, and it seems pretty clear to me that a lot of people also knew what was going on and look,
it was disclosed.
Yeah,
it was like,
yeah,
that's okay.
Exactly. You can't do that. That's not acceptable. So that, to my mind, actually changing that culture in the bureaucracy is going to be more of a long-term challenge than changing to what extent that actually exists in the legislature.
Senator Rhodes, you and I over the years have had a number of conversations when we see something happen and then, what's the hole in the law that this person is walking through? Do you see this kind of a real sea change coming from having tougher laws on fraud, false statements, and that sort of thing?
Well, I think there are two parts to it. So having the better laws is a prerequisite, but it's a necessary but not sufficient activity. The other part is people have to believe they're going to get caught. Let's see, how long have I been judge chair in the Senate and the House now? This will be my 7th year, I guess, and 9th year, sorry. And what I've learned, one of the things I've learned is it's not the penalty that matters, it's whether you're going to get caught. So the other aspect of this is having active enforcement. And last year we did, I think it was Senator De La Cruz's idea to to beef up the white-collar division in the Department of the Attorney General, and that should help. So when you add those two things together, again, talking about connecting the dots, that would help.
Judge Foley, when you come to this kind of these issues of these, if you get caught, as a judge, longtime, public servant, and so on, and when we look at the really high-profile corruption scandals, the Catherine K. Aloha, the police chief, they knew they weren't going to get caught because they were the law enforcement people. I mean, is corruption in the law enforcement area an issue, too, that we need to pay more attention to?
Well, we are paying more attention to it, and the K. Aloas are no longer with us. They're in prison. And Kaneshiro, unfortunately, has been indicted, and he's presumed innocent until proven guilty. So that's where the feds really come in. You asked, one of your callers asked, do we need the feds? Well, that's when we need them.
For the law enforcement piece
Absolutely.
of it.
When our state and county law enforcement goes bad, that's when we need the feds.
But then how do we improve the culture in state and county law enforcement so people are willing to say, wait a minute, what I was just asked to do, I don't want to do that. Do you think people feel safe? I mean,
I can tell you, Steve Alm, who's a friend, and I supported him when he ran for city council. That was his platform.
Ran for prosecutor.
Prosecutor, sitting county, I don't know what I said, but sitting county prosecutor. That was his platform, is to to look at his own office, to clean out his own office, to clean out government. He's one of the proponents behind these bills on fraud, false claim, false statement. He supported what Senator Rhodes said the legislature did last session on more resources in state and county government to investigate and to prosecute. So I do think we have people there that want to do it, and I think because of these high-profile corruption cases, I think we're moving in that direction, but we'll still need the federal government.
Let me ask you, Senator Rhodes, how strong is our whistleblower law? Like if someone called me as a reporter or a law enforcement or a civil lawyer and says, I want to report my boss, the captain in this division, or my boss, the division head for procurement in here, and I want to report that. How certain can someone advise that person you'll be safe from retaliation if you do that?
Well, this is one area where people are very, very afraid. I mean, we do have a whistleblower law that I think Judge Foley helped write. It guarantees that you can't be retaliated against, but nobody believes it. So I have never litigated one. I don't really know how they work in practice. I don't think they come up very often because people are afraid. So if you're in that position, I would talk to a lawyer and see what they say about how well you're going to be protected.
And people did talk to me. I did write the act. Senator Rhodes is correct. Legally, they are protected. They get their attorney fees. They can't be retaliated.
How do they get to the threshold where they're going to be protected?
Well, the law protects them. But Senator Rhodes' point's good, because people used to come to me as a civil rights lawyer and expose something. And there are ways to retaliate without the fingerprints being there, and that's what they're afraid of.
Should they, and maybe this can be a practicum for whistleblowers, even though I'm talking about doing with corruption, is like, as we were talking before, is that when we've had people come to us to say, oh, this thing is happening, we'll often tell them, you need to talk to a lawyer. Is that sort of something that people who are considering whistleblowing should do before they go through the process?
You have one nice avenue that people are using, and I've directed. Since I've been chairman of the commission, I'm getting calls of corruption in state and county government.
I'll give you my card.
Yeah. And I direct them to the Ethics Commission. If you go online on the State Ethics Commission, you can file an anonymous complaint, and no one knows you're behind it, and the Ethics Commission will look at it and follow up on it. If it comes within their mandate, they'll handle it. If not, they'll refer it to state, county, or federal.
So if I've done that, am I safe from retaliation?
I think you are. It's anonymous, from what I see of the process, unless, somebody figures out, oh, it must have come from Darryl. No one else.
Well, that's what the fear is, though. I mean,
and that's a real fear, and that's a reality, and it goes back to your earlier point in discussion on the culture. A lot of people just say it's just not worth it.
Let me ask Colin Moore. I mean, the culture of fear. How real is it in this community, and how pervasive is it, and how can we overcome it? I mean, it seems real to me, and I've dealt with it a lot.
I think it is real. I mean, and it's partially because this is such a small state. It isn't so hard to make those connections. In California, for example, if you have thousands and thousands of people working for different agencies across a massive state, it's harder to point the finger. In Hawaii, it's not so hard. And so even if you have all of these protections, maybe you fear reprisals through your family, or you're just fear of social ostracization. I mean, I think that's a real fear. Not even that you would lose your job, that you would just be sort of blacklisted by your friends or family for exposing something that people largely think is okay. It's not, is it really that bad to be checking your own electrical work? I mean, is that who's really hurting in a case like that? And I think for people who do make these principled stands, the blowback can be fierce. And I think the only way to show that it's okay is for people who do that, who do take a stand, 5 years later, to be able to say, I'm glad I did it. I was protected. I feel like this was a positive experience. I made real change, and I wasn't personally harmed by doing the right thing.
Janet, you spent many years in private business. Right. Is that fear exist in private business as well as in public life? And I'm just wondering, what do you think of that culture and how to address it?
I do think it's there in the private sector as well. And, you know, the same things that Colin described about, oh, people have figured out who the whistleblower was, and I might lose my job, and my friends at work won't like me anymore. It's definitely there. But the Ethics Commission option that Dan mentioned is a very important safety valve, because until we get to the point where people think, you know, I have an opportunity to do this, but, you know, good chance now that I'll get caught. I think we're really not going to be successful to make this cultural change we're talking about.
You know, I'm remembering that in the Catherine Kealoha case, people went to the Ethics Commission. The Ethics Commission was investigating them, and
That was the city and county of Honolulu. I'm talking about the state.
Right.
I mean, is there a distinction to be made?
Absolutely. I'd go to the state.
Okay, go with that. Why?
Well, they seem to be more aggressive. I have friends on the commission, city and county, and they're fine people, but they let go, I thought, the best investigator, Chuck Toder.
Exactly.
I thought he was doing a great job, and they let him go.
One thing the commission did recommend, by the way, we're aware of the lack of resources at the County Ethics Commission, and we did recommend a one-time appropriation to help them out and build up their capabilities. I don't know that that's going anywhere, though.
You know, but you guys make it a very important point in that, you know, from county to county, from state to state, we've talked a lot about the state. An awful lot of these cases have been county-level cases. I know Senator Rhodes, you know, you're predominantly involved with the state government, but is there something that the state government can do to bolster the county's ability to follow their ethics? Or, like, do we have a statewide ethics law that would apply across all of the counties equally?
Yeah, the state ethics law applies to all. Now I'm hesitating. I think it applies to all public employees. So private, you know, county or state. Yeah, no, I mean, the commission did put forward a bill on trying to, so I didn't realize this before because I'm pretty Honolulu-centric because I represent downtown Honolulu, but the Neighbor Island Ethics Commissions apparently are just sort of shells. They don't have any paid staff, and you guys did offer some solutions. I did move your bill. I don't know if it's going any further, but it's, you know, just to jolt them awake, get them going. But yeah, I think that the state, I think Judge Foley's right that you can always go to the state one.
Colin, you mentioned that you brought up the Civil Beach story, which was an excellent story about this building inspector that had a company doing electrical work, and he ultimately was inspecting his own work. But the fact of the matter is, just having the company was a conflict of interest because, you know, he's going to be harder on a competing company as a building inspector. It's not,
Right,
don't just,
sure.
He was told, oh, well, don't inspect your own work.
Right, right.
But he was in a position to discriminate against others, and that just flew by. I mean, how important do you think it is as a talking point for us to be asking about the county level of ethics examination?
Oh, I think it's very important, and they need more resources. That's, you know, we can't just have laws on the books with no one to enforce them or to investigate them. And I think that's been true for too long, and they need more protections. I mean, I think we just mentioned what happened with the City and County Ethics Commission, and there was a lot of pushback, and you know, the lead person there really, I think in many ways, was forced out. And they need independent budgets, they need more autonomy, all of that to operate. But then, you know, for the DPP example, I mean, we just need to be more careful about not allowing those conflicts of interest. Because, you know, we started this conversation talking about giving people more trust in government. And one thing we know about ethics reforms is, you know, yes, we want them to stop corruption, but we also don't want there to be the appearance of corruption or conflicts of interest. I mean, no matter what, even if this person who is doing these electrical inspections, even if he or she were totally neutral and very fair, anyone looking at that from the outside would say this is rigged, it's corrupt. And that's what we can't allow. And it may mean making accommodations. Maybe it means paying inspectors more so they don't try to moonlight. I mean, there have to be accommodations because there are incentives. And here in Hawaii, often they're monetary because it's so hard for people to make ends meet.
Judge, go ahead. Go.
Well, I would just add on to that. I say that's one of the ironies of this whole situation is that the more people who get caught, which is a good thing if they did something wrong, the more people who get caught, the more people think that that the system is corrupt. And
choose one.
So you make the system work and you catch the people, but then everybody thinks it's corrupt because all these people are getting caught. No, I don't know.
Well, I mean, Judge Foley, I mean, you have been in a position over many years to really get a sense of the temperature of these issues. Do we need to go through a period of time where we are throwing all the crooks in jail and endure this period of public disgust in order to get to where we need to go?
Well, I do think we need to uncover corruption. I think we have to.
It's not all uncovered yet, right?
No, I mean, and we have to prosecute, and we have to convict, and we have to make it very high profile and to send out a message. This is white-collar crime we're talking about, and a lot of is at stake. If you're a state or county official or employee, if you get caught, you can't run for office for 10 years, you lose your job, there's fines, serious penalties. So it's my hope that if we can really ramp up the investigations, prosecutions, convictions, make it very high profile, people will think twice before they commit these acts.
You know, Janet, we've got 2 attorneys and a university professor here. You're the one who actually spent a lot of time in the private business.
Yes, that's right.
And do you think the public just doesn't know enough about the judiciary, know enough about the way the legislature works, know enough? They're just living their lives and it's just hard for them to grasp and get excited about these issues?
I don't know. I think the average person understands fraud or bribery, and I think they're shocked. And this is an area where the media has been very important in exposing what's going on and making the stories accessible to the general public. No, I think maybe they don't understand the ins and outs of the legislature, but the average person understands corruption, yes.
And what do you think the public sentiment is right now?
Well, to some extent, people are a little worn out with all of it, and probably question whether anything will come of the commission's work. I don't know. I certainly hope that it is successful work. So that's how my friends and neighbors sort of see the situation.
Judge, we've gone through a lot of topics here, and you were the chair of that commission. Is there anything that we need to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Well, there's one broad area that we've made numerous recommendations: more disclosure, more transparency. In terms of lobbyists, that lobbyists disclose what they're doing at the legislature, what financial relationships they have with legislators, what bills or other measures they're working on, legislators disclosing, making public records more accessible to the general public, especially when they're in the public interest, posting things online, transparency. We think that across the board in the legislature, in executive agencies, would be very helpful to help uncover wrongdoing. That it's in the light. It's not in secret.
Senator, do you see a stomach for that at the legislature in terms of forcing out more disclosures? Some of those proposals were very specific as to legislators having to disclose much broader levels of conflict than they've had to before.
Oh yeah, no, I think there is stomach for it. I think a lot of what we've talked about tonight, stuff's going to pass this year. I don't have a crystal ball as to which ones exactly. I mean, some things we're already very transparent about, like what we spend for our office allowances that you can just look them up. All our salaries, all the staff salaries are public information. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is that you can watch everything on TV now if you want to, and you can testify from home now too that you couldn't do before. So no, I think there's definitely a stomach for it, and there has been for years. I mean, there's been people in the legislature pushing for a lot of these transparency bills and ideas for a long time.
Colin Moore, on those disclosure issues, where do you think the most important thing that legislators or lobbyists should be disclosing that's not being disclosed now?
Boy, I'm not an expert on what they're required to disclose now. So let me say that there's one part of the commission's proposal that I don't think is going to pass this year, but I think was very important in building public trust, which was to establish an office of a public advocate. This actually was an idea that Jim Shawn, a former legislator, developed, and I think this would do a lot to improve relations between citizens and legislators.
Well, great discussion. We have reached the end of our hour already. Mahalo for all of you folks at home for joining us, and we thank our guests, Dan Foley and Janet Mason from the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct, Senator Carl Rhodes, and political analyst Colin Moore. Insights will be off next Thursday. Please join us instead for a special kako, Hawaii's Town Hall. A group of experts and concerned citizens will discuss rising sea levels here in Hawaii and their impact on beaches, infrastructure, and homes. Please join us then. For Insights on PBS Hawaii, I'm Daryl Huff. Aloha.